She was building her cabin, one log at a time. Unaware the cowboy watching was a widower longing for a family. Montana Territory, late afternoon, in early November, 1881. Snow clung to the branches of pine and spruce, blanketing the clearing in a hush only the wilderness could know. The skeleton of a small cabin stood half-finished, its log walls rough but steady. Wind whispered through the gaps in the wood, carrying the scent of pine sap and winter's approach. "Miss, I thought this place was abandoned, but clearly I was wrong." The voice came from the tree line, low and calm, with the faint drawl of a man who had spent years with horses and silence. Eleanor Sullivan straightened slowly, one hand braced against her lower back, the other gripping the handle of her hammer. She turned to find a man on horseback watching her from just beyond the clearing, his bay gelding pawing at the frosted ground. Eleanor's heart kicked against her ribs. She had not seen another soul in over a week, not since the Kowalskis brought her a sack of flour and a warning about early snow. Her eyes narrowed. "This land is mine. If you're lost, head back west. There's nothing for you here." The man tipped his hat. "I mean no trouble, ma'am. Just riding the boundary line of my family's ranch. Name's Clayton Hartwell. Circle H, 10 miles north." He paused, eyes flicking from the half-built cabin to the worn gloves on her hands. "Didn't expect to find someone. Building alone." Eleanor's gaze didn't soften. "I prefer it that way." Clayton dismounted with practiced ease. He led the horse a few steps closer but kept a respectful distance, boots crunching lightly over frozen grass. "No offense meant, just most women don't do this kind of work." He glanced at the wall frame, then at her belly. "Especially not in your condition." "I didn't come here to fit most women." Eleanor lifted the hammer again, struck a nail with sure, even force. Her breath steamed in the cold air. "I came here to start over." Clayton watched her a moment longer, then stepped back, raising both hands slightly as if to show he held no threat. "Fair enough. Just thought you might need help with something heavy. Carrying a child and a cabin at the same time, that takes grit." "I've got grit. What I don't have is time for charity." She turned, lifting another log plank into place. Her movement was slower now, heavier with the child growing beneath her ribs. But she didn't waver. "So if you're offering pity, take it back to Circle A." Clayton studied her. There was defiance in her posture, yes, but something else too. Weariness hidden behind pride. He didn't see a woman breaking. He saw a woman holding everything together with nothing but will. "Not pity," he said finally, "just respect." Eleanor didn't respond at first. She hammered in silence until the plank held fast. Then she looked at him, truly looked. The man had the bearing of someone raised with comfort, but there were lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of loss. His clothes were clean, but his hands were calloused. And there was something in his expression, a flicker of something she hadn't seen in a long time. Understanding. "I've had enough of people who want to fix things," she said, her voice softer now. "I'm not broken, just building." Clayton nodded, understood. He mounted his horse again, but before turning back to the aspens, he hesitated. "If you change your mind, ma'am, if you ever need anything, the Circle H ain't far." Eleanor didn't answer. She watched as he rode off, disappearing between the trees. Only when he was gone did she lean against the half-built wall and exhale. The child inside her stirred, a soft flutter low in her belly. She pressed a hand to it, eyes still on the place where he'd vanished. "That's not the kind of man who passes through by accident," she murmured. And though she wouldn't admit it aloud, her heart had stirred too. Not with fear, with something that frightened her more. Hope. 3 days later. The morning sun hung low, casting long shadows across the frozen prairie. Eleanor stood at the base of her half-finished cabin, a plank of rough-hewn pine balanced awkwardly against her shoulder. Her lower back throbbed with every breath, her fingers stiff from cold and labor. The baby had shifted lower in the past week, bringing with it a new heaviness that made each task feel like a mountain. Still, she worked. She had to. She had driven the foundation stakes herself, hauled each log from the woods with only a borrowed cart and grit. Her food stores were packed tight in the root cellar, and her chimney now pulled cleanly with smoke. But the walls weren't done, and the snow whispered of coming harder days. She set the plank down with a grunt, breath catching as a sharp ache lanced across her side. "You're pushing too hard." The voice, deep, familiar, startled her. She spun, heart leaping, only to find Clayton Hartwell standing beside his bay gelding at the edge of the clearing. He held a bundle in his arms, wrapped in a checkered cloth. He looked less formal today. No vest, no gloves, just a wool coat, and eyes that saw too much. Eleanor tightened her grip on the hammer. "I didn't ask for company." "No," he said gently, "but I figured I'd come anyway." He took a slow step forward and placed the bundle atop a stump. "My mother sent this. Tea for nausea. And some baby clothes she knitted. Said you'd probably pretend not to need them, but send them anyway." She would. Eleanor stared at the bundle, not moving. Clayton glanced at her cabin walls. "Coming along. You've done all this yourself?" She gave a curt nod. "Every nail." "Impressive." He looked at her belly, then at her hands. "Painful, too, I imagine." Eleanor folded her arms, bracing herself against the cold and something warmer she didn't want to feel. "Why are you really here, Mr. Hartwell? Slumming? Or just gathering stories to tell your mother?" Clayton's gaze didn't flinch. "I came because I wanted to, and because I don't like the thought of you working through the pain, alone, when it doesn't have to be that way. I'm not a charity case. I never said you were." She stepped forward, voice tight. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. Men like you offer help like it's some kind of blessing, but it always comes with a price, expectations, judgments." He didn't speak at first, just let her words hang there in the morning frost. Then, softly, "Some people offer help not because they think you're weak, but because they admire your strength." Eleanor blinked, caught off guard. Clayton continued, quieter now. "I've seen a lot of people fold under less than what you're carrying. But here you are, building something real, alone, with no one watching, no one clapping. That's not weakness. That's rare." She swallowed hard, her mouth dry. "I won't stay," he added, gesturing to the bundle. "Just thought you could use the tea. And maybe a reminder that not everyone who shows up is looking to fix or claim you." Eleanor looked at the bundle, then at him. The honesty in his voice unsettled her more than any flirtation could have. He meant it. "You can leave it there," she said finally. He nodded once, turned and walked back toward his horse. She watched him go, her pulse louder than the wind. When he vanished into the trees, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She moved to the stump and opened the cloth. Inside were 3 tiny knit garments, soft yellow wool, stitched with care, and a tin of tea leaves that smelled faintly of ginger and mint. For the first time since she'd arrived in Montana, something in her chest cracked, not enough to fall apart, just enough to feel. 1 week later, the wind had picked up again, slipping through the cracks in the unfinished cabin walls, rattling loose nails like bones in a sack. Eleanor sat beside the hearth, if it could be called that yet, where stones marked the future outline of a fireplace. Her hands were red from handling lumber, her breath clouding in front of her face. Clayton knelt across from her, setting another log near the growing stack. They had worked all morning, side by side. No declarations, no unnecessary words. Just the rhythm of hammers and the occasional breathless laugh when a board refused to fit and splintered in protest. He handed her the canteen. She took it without hesitation now. "You work like a man twice your size," he said, wiping sawdust from his sleeves. "I had to," she replied, staring into the wind-dancing embers of a fire barely holding on. "I didn't have the luxury of waiting for someone else to save me." He sat beside her, pulling his coat tighter. She did not look at him when she spoke next. "I was married, in Boston, proper ceremony, ivory gloves, roses, the whole show. He walked out 6 months later, said the child wasn't his." Clayton turned his head slowly, his eyes unreadable. "I never told him the truth," Eleanor continued, "that the child was his, that the dates lined up. Didn't see the point. He left before I could even say the words." Silence pressed between them. She exhaled. The divorce papers, they were never filed, not fully. Legally, I'm still his wife. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, that's a hell of a weight to carry. Eleanor let her gaze fall to the boards beneath them. It's not something I lead with. Out here, people already look at me like I'm damaged goods. Adding legally married doesn't exactly inspire confidence. Clayton gave a quiet nod. People are quick to judge what they don't understand. She glanced sideways. You haven't asked if I still love him. No, he said softly. I figure if you did, you wouldn't be here. She blinked, once, then twice. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. What about you? She asked, voice barely above the wind. You don't strike me as the type who rides alone just for the peace and quiet. He looked toward the snowy hills. Her name was Sarah. My wife. We married young. Too young, maybe. She liked to race horses. Took a gelding too fast one morning and broke her neck on the ridge east of our ranch. Eleanor's heart stilled. I found her myself. I was 28. That was 5 winters ago. Since then, I ride, I mend fences, I keep to myself. Not because I'm afraid to love again. Just didn't see the point. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry. So am I, he said. But I'm still here. And so are you. The wind howled outside, snow spiraling in bursts across the cabin's open doorway. They worked a few hours more. He chiseled boards for the roof frame while she measured lengths for the door. Their movements found a kind of harmony neither of them commented on, as if speaking it would break the spell. When the sun dipped behind the peaks, casting long violet shadows across the valley, they sat again, this time on the half-finished porch. Eleanor wrapped her shawl around her belly, her gloved hands trembling slightly from exertion. Clayton offered his coat. She refused it. But after a beat, she said quietly, It feels safer to do everything alone. But maybe it's just lonelier. Clayton looked at her, not with pity, not with possession, just something steadier, warmer. Maybe, he said. And the wind for once passed softly through the timber walls, as if deciding for that moment not to push them apart. Late autumn, wind curling through the valley, bringing whispers with it. By the time the first frost glazed the tall grasses around Eleanor's cabin, the wind carried more than just cold. It carried voices, fragments of rumors, laced with curiosity and judgment, drifting into town with every passing wagon. They talked about a woman alone in the wilderness, too proud to accept charity, too stubborn to fit into society's mold. But more than that, they talked about the visits, about Clayton Hartwell, about a respected rancher's son, seen too often riding south, staying too long near a half-built home, and a woman who wore her shame like armor. Eleanor had heard whispers at the general store in Willowbrook when she traded eggs for flour. The clerk's polite smile was tight-lipped now. The Kowalskis, kind as they'd been, had grown cautious, their questions more clipped. She pretended not to notice. Until one cold morning, with the ground hard beneath her boots and the air sharp with pine and secrets, a carriage she did not recognize rolled into her clearing. The woman who stepped out moved like someone raised to rule a room. Her coat was imported wool, her gloves lambskin, her hair pinned in an elaborate twist that spoke of servants and salons. Miss Sullivan, the woman said crisply, adjusting her skirt as she surveyed the modest porch.